All right. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Great. Welcome to our learning session. Please put your name, your pronouns, and the organization you're with in the chat. So the network is a learning, advocacy, and collaborative action network that is open to all community members and organizations. So my name is Colette Harris. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Clinical Innovation Program Manager here at the North Sound ACH. In today's network learning session, we will discuss equitable solutions for reentry and justice for criminal legal system involved populations. My personal interaction with the criminal legal system has been as a primary care physician, caring and advocating for my patients who are reintegrating into community, and also as a family member. My cousin was incarcerated for 12 years. I am really excited to learn from our panelists and for our discussion today. Next slide. We will begin with a land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And I am here today on Upper Skagit and Sauk Suato land. Next slide. So just a few housekeeping items. Please use the chat throughout today's session. It will be monitored for your questions. And if you're able, please have your camera on. And just note that this meeting is being recorded. So we'll begin today by doing a little grounding, a little historical context, and details about current conditions in our region. Then we'll go to our panel discussion, and then we'll have time for breakout sessions to discuss what we've just learned. And then finally, we'll come back together and close and discuss next steps. I'd like to do a Mentimeter so everyone can participate. So if you look in the chat, the link to the Mentimeter should be in there. You can also visit www.menti.com and put in the code, or you can scan the QR code there. But the question I would like for you to think about is, in your experience with the criminal legal system, whether first-person experience through a friend or family member, or as a member of the community, were you or they able to access healing resources or participate in accountability process? What barriers are you aware of on release or while currently incarcerated? So just a few minutes for you to respond to that question, and we'll see what folks have to say. All right, so I see 1,000% not, or 10,000% not. There's such a lack of support. It is astounding. It's almost like they expect everything to just go back to normal. Medicaid not being turned back on post-release. Oh, I've definitely experienced that in my practice. 3 nephews in and out of jail for close to 20 years. No resources available to help them with healing or reentry. No, many language barriers and cultural awareness inequities. Lack of housing. Barrier access to substance use treatment and support. No opportunity for jobs. No, there was nothing like this even offered to my family member when they left jail. I'm seeing quite a few lack of support for jobs. Mental health services not available, and terminal wait for trial. My partner detoxed from heroin on the floor of the Whatcom County Jail with no assistance. Thankfully, he survived. I also see in the chat transportation prejudice. Housing is an issue 10-year post-release. All right, so thank you everyone for sharing. It looks like we have a very diverse and relevant experience just in the space together. So thank you so much for participating in that. Now I would like to hear from our CEO, Liz Baxter, about why we're discussing justice and equity for incarcerated and criminal legal system involved populations at this particular time. So Liz.
Thank you so much, Colette, and I so appreciate the panel that you've pulled together and all the planning that's gone into this. I'm going to give just a little bit of a backdrop before having Colette have the floor back to talk about what we're hoping to get out of today. But part of the reason that the ACH is involved in this is because the state of Washington received a federal waiver for their Medicaid program that took effect on July 1. And for those who don't know, if any state wants to do something above and beyond what the federal minimum requirements are for Medicaid, they have to have a waiver. So a waiver doesn't mean you're doing less. It probably means you're doing more than what the federal government requires. And so there are a number of things in this waiver around some continuing eligibility, some things around older adults, housing and employment, behavioral health, continuing enrollment for kids who are on Apple Health from birth through the age of 5, postpartum up to 12 months. And there is this piece in the waiver that is related to reentry from a carceral setting. And so in addition, we have all across the state some care coordination hubs. There's a native care coordination hub that's being put in place, some additional services that will be available, and that's what that health-related social needs line is. But the governor really had an emphasis around reentry, and so that became a part of the waiver. We're still waiting to hear how the ACHs will be a part of that work, but it is going to provide reentry coverage for anyone who's leaving a prison, a jail, a youth correctional facility across the state of Washington. And it's a new thing that has not been a part of the Medicaid program in the past. And it's going to provide some pre-release services and some care coordination after release from incarceration. And as you can imagine, folks who are coming out of prison, it's kind of at least there's some notion of when do you know when somebody is leaving prison. That is not the case for people who are going in and out of jail. And so there's a number of relationship pieces that we need to put in place, perhaps a very different array of partners that we need to have in place than we've done throughout the first waiver. But it's also just this amazing opportunity for North Sound to be trying to figure out one more way that we look at equity, targeted universalism. How do we create a place where everyone feels like they belong? How do we think about the vital conditions for well-being? We're now going to be doing that with a group of people who are leaving jail and prison, returning to communities, and trying to find ways to support all the linkages that go along with that. So, I'm probably going to turn it back to you, Colette. I'm going to put a link in the chat for a table that the Healthcare Authority has put together just about the waiver itself and what you can see in that. But North Sound is using the same framing for the work that we're going to be doing around reentry as we have done with all of our projects, trying to figure out ways to invest in capacity building for those of you who actually do the work, who know the work best and have lived experience to kind of be in that space and help it be the best that it can be. So we're just incredibly grateful for those that we've been meeting along the last year and who we might be meeting as we look forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that context. And I also wanted to say, I forgot to say this earlier, my apologies, that please select interpretation Spanish at the bottom panel of Zoom if you need Spanish interpretation. All right, next slide, please. Oh, I think back one slide. Yes, thank you. So just a note about language. So today I will use the term incarcerated person. However, our community members may choose to self-identify differently, for example, as a prisoner. Every term has a different historical and political context and engenders different feelings in different people. While language is important, we learn from our panelists that relationships and praxis, how we treat people, should have the most value. Consider that even harmful systems can use seemingly inclusive language. Now, remembering our land acknowledgement, I would like to ground us in the history of colonialism in our country. Stormy Ogden, a previously incarcerated Tule River Yokut, Kashia Pomo, and Lake County Pomo woman, certified substance use counselor, community organizer, and speaker, defines carceral colonialism for us. Europeans locked up Native people in military forts, missions, reservations, boarding schools, and today increasingly in state and federal prisons. For American Indians, incarceration is an extension of the history and violent mechanisms of colonization. Next slide. Thank you. Abolitionist organizer Miriam Kaba writes that prisons are an iteration of structural racism in the United States, which allows some people to be treated as less than human and therefore reasonably subject to all manner of exploitation, torture, and abuse. This is the legacy of anti-Blackness in the United States. Next slide. And we can see that carceral colonialism is functioning right here in our backyard. Washington State Medicaid claims data demonstrates that 4% of Medicaid enrollees in the North Sound region were arrested from July 2021 to June 2022. And here you can see that regional arrest rates were highest among American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black Medicaid enrollees. That is, among all American Indian and Alaska Native and Black Medicaid enrollees in the North Sound region, 9.6% and 6.1% respectively had been arrested during that period. Next slide. In 2016, the average daily population of Whatcom County Jail was 14% Native American and 7% Black. That is despite Native American and Black people representing 4% and 2% of the county population, respectively. And people of all races who identified as Hispanic were booked into Whatcom County Jail at about 3.5 times the rate of non-Hispanic people. American Indian and Alaska Native, Black, and Latinx youth were also disproportionately detained in Skagit, Snohomish, and Whatcom counties compared to census population data in 2020. Next slide. And here you can see, according to a 2016 report from the Department of Social and Health Services, more than half of Medicaid clients entering North Sound region jails in 2013 needed mental health treatment, as seen in blue, substance use disorder treatment, as seen as mustard, and more than a third had co-occurring needs. That is, they had a need for mental health treatment as well as substance use disorder treatment, and that's represented in the graph in the orange. At the state level, a federal judge has recently determined that Washington was in contempt for failure to provide adequate behavioral health services. So incarcerated people with mental health disabilities who were detained pending competency evaluations or treatment to restore that competency filed a lawsuit against the state because they were being forced to wait in jail for extended periods of time due to lack of funds, healthcare workers, and beds in mental health facilities. In a 2018 settlement, the state agreed to work on decreasing these wait times. However, in that time, wait times have just increased as the state shuttered mental health facilities. So as you can see, the criminal legal system is not just racist, classist, and imperialist. It is also ableist. It is a place where many different oppressive systems intersect. And with that, I would like to introduce our panelists to begin our discussions about how to disrupt these systems. The panelists bring diverse lived, professional, or a combination of lived and professional experience, advocating for incarcerated people and people reintegrating into communities. I am very grateful for the work that they do, and I'm very excited to have them here today. All right. So we have Chris Hoke from Underground Ministries, Alex Sanchez, also from Underground Ministries, Christina Jorgensen from Participatory Justice, and Kamanti Carter from Participatory Justice and the Black Prisoners Caucus. So thank you so much for being with us today. I will ask a series of 2 questions, and I will allow each panelist to speak. So I will begin with question number 1. Please define the alternative justice frameworks that are practiced in your organization. How do they differ from the current criminal legal system, and how do these principles inform your work? And whoever would like to go, just go ahead and start.
Well, I'll jump in if nobody else will. Hello, I'm Christina. I use they, them pronouns. And I am excited for this question. I wanted to start it off by showing y'all a 2-minute clip of a video about what transformative justice is, because I feel like Adrienne Marie Brown does a really thoughtful job of capturing it. So let me figure out how I'm going to share this with you. And you're going to see my 5 million open tabs. And I can't see anybody after I play this. So if something's not coming through right, please let me know.
So when I'm trying to explain transformative justice to people, I usually back away from, I don't go straight at, okay, this is transformative justice. I usually actually go back to punitive justice. I start out with like what we're used to and what we've been socialized into is punitive justice. And then I ask people, if I'm in a room full of people, even in a room full of friends, I'll be like, how many of you grew up in an experience where you were punished when harm happened? And I give examples. You were expelled, you were put in detention, you suspension, you're put on timeout. But the main move was you're removed from community in some way because you've done harm. And people are like, oh yeah, everyone either has that experience or they were part of spaces where they saw that experience. And then I'm like, we grow that up so that then you go into prison or you get the death penalty or you get canceled from your community, right? It's the same process. So we live in this, that's what we're swimming in. And then I talk about restorative justice as a steps in the right direction, right? It's like harm has happened. How do we restore ourselves back to that relationship that existed before the harm happened? So I'm like, someone stole your purse, you get an apology, they do some community service. Hopefully we've returned to like where we were. But for me, I always say that doesn't go far enough, because if the original conditions were unjust, then returning to those original conditions is not actually justice, right? You're just going to have someone who's like, great, now I returned everything to you. I still don't have anything and I'm still hungry and I still need something. I'm like, so we need to go further. So to me, transformative justice, the first aspect of it is that it goes all the way down to the root system of the harm and says, how do we change, heal, transform, pull this up? What do we need to do at the root system so that this harm is no longer possible? Like what we're trying to do is stop this harm from ever being possible again. And then how do we understand that the state is so committed to punitive justice, so the state is not going to be able to engage in transformative justice with us, so we don't go to the state to do this kind of deep work. And then how do we turn towards each other to hold this space? And in that turning to each other, we have to say, I believe you can transform.
Stop sharing. Okay, so I like to show that video because I think it summarizes it well in a way that folks can understand. But in the organization I work for, which I started back in 2017, Participatory Justice, and we're by and for legal system impacted communities, and we use transformative practices to build community responses to harm. And so when I am sharing about like the framework or the things that I think of in the practices, this would be like the definition of it. And so going back to what Adrienne said, our current criminal legal system looks at what law was broken, who broke it, and how should they be punished, where restorative justice really looks at who has been harmed, what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs. And then transformative justice, like she said, takes it further to say how, or to ask, like, how can we transform the conditions that made the harm possible to begin with? And so that's the framework that we use.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would like to chime in with regards to just the application, right? Like how do we use these practices in our community? And so again, my name is Kamani Carter. Formerly incarcerated. I spent a large part of my life locked up in the criminal justice system here in Washington State. I come from the Black Prisoners Caucus. I also do community work with participatory justice. My pronouns are he, him, and anything with regards to love and care. But I think that the things that I was able to learn, as a young youth who was, surrounded by a lot of destructive opportunities, right, that young people are kind of allured to, restoring harm and healing through those processes wasn't present. Right. And so now when I think about growing up in the juvenile system, the prison system, being able to learn, grow, heal through a lot of my trauma, as well as, the harm that I caused myself, being able to feel community supporting me, loving me, letting me know that I wasn't my mistake was the thing that allowed me to grow back towards community. And so when I think about what does that look like, when community is coming into a place to help people who have received harm or perpetuated it, and we're loving folks through those processes as a way of being able to help them, come to a place of identifying where that harm started. What starts to happen is you have a person willing to now participate in the process, right? Like if your purse was harmed, if your purse was stolen, excuse me, and the parent or the community member of the child or the adult who stole that purse was identified, right? The options is that if we participate in the system, we call the police, right? But if we're trying to restore that connection that was broken, we contact the person whose purse was stolen, right? As a way of being able to let you know that we know who caused harm and we would like to be able to return your items, right? These things right here, it's property, right? This doesn't involve police, right? This is about how do we restore the trust that was broken. And so I think that when you have people who are surrounding the person who caused the harm, willing to hold them accountable, and the person who have received the harm open to the fact that this is justice, this is a framework in which I can be restored back to my safety, and this person right here can be supported in their environment. That's what transformative justice looks like. And so the question is how do we get our communities to the point to where we're calling to our neighbors and to our friends as a way of resolving harm versus the system, right? Because as a parent, if your child broke the window next door, the thing you don't do to your child is call the police and have them arrested, right? Oh, you broke a law, doesn't matter, I don't care, you're going to jail, right? That's not how you create trust in your home. And so we want to be able to make sure that those things extend to our community. And it's hard when you're dealing with people who have committed criminal offenses, right? Sometimes violent ones, but we have to love them through it in order for us to really restore the harm that was caused. So that's the practice, that's the application, and it's happening in our community, and it's not happening enough.
Thank you so much.
I'll jump in here. My name is Chris Hoke. I'm the director of underground ministries based here in Skagit County. One of the things that that helps me when I'm speaking with different, whether I'm talking with friends or at family dinners or at larger groups, is there's a lot of awareness of mass incarceration. As we started to use some of these terms, a lot of people want to be part of it, but they can get kind of overwhelmed with all the different terms. And so I just am so grateful for Christina and Kamanti already giving such clear framework for how restorative justice is a different framework for even thinking about how we deal with harm. in transformative justice is the larger conditions in the community to even transform the communities so that we're not reliant not only on punitive practices, but that the poverty, the inequity, the trauma, the division of the community isn't even there as the kind of like a seedbed for crime and more harm to continue. So what we do at Underground Ministries, we're more about the reentry side. And so reentry is, it's a limited term, but it helps because it's really clear about it's coming home from incarceration. I got into reentry because 18 years ago, I actually met Alex here, who is my friend and coworker now in Skagit County Jail. And I went in just to be studying liberation theology with a practitioner here in Skagit County after leaving Berkeley just a year before that, 2005. I thought I would just be in the area for a year or so, getting some kind of street level and incarceration level spiritual reflection. But I met so many amazing guys like Alex, guys who were my age, guys who were funny, who were really astute, had astute social analysis in a way of what was going on in our communities. And I was like, man, these are the guys I want to like not just meet with them when they're in red scrubs at the jail when we're doing a pastor visit. I didn't want to be a pastor, but Alex and others called me pastor, so I got ordained in a different way. So it was these relationships, and I thought, man, how do we go have coffee? How do we go fly fishing? How do I go have carne asada with you when you get out? And I realized we had really great connection. We'd write prison letters, but then they wouldn't show up. And as I started to really make plans a year, 2 years ahead of time and walk with my friends through the process, I saw there were just a gauntlet of invisible barriers, or invisible to those of us on the other side of the underground, of felony related, legal financial obligation related, poverty related, all these systemic barriers that were there kind of creating an underground. If prison were just like the deepest tomb, people, when they get out of the gates, are still living like a civic netherworld. And so I learned how, walking with my friends, I did it not to be a social worker, but to just get my buddies home. I learned how many barriers there were. And so we got into reentry work that way. And while we did reentry work, that's through the process that we saw folks need community. It couldn't just be one or two kind of workaholic social worker chaplains like myself, but really it was when people were belonging, not just getting an apartment or getting a house or getting a job, but in their kids' lives and having relationships with their coworkers and their bosses, and maybe part of a 12-step group or going hiking, that really belonging to the community and getting the community involved is the deepest repair and transformation that I get excited about. And so we aim at a lot of those transformative justice visions through the tangible work of walking with people in trusting relationships out of prison. And Alex is leading our direct reentry on Skagit County, primarily with gang-affected individuals. So Alex, I don't know if you want to share some of both your story and what you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thank you, team. Yeah, it's been a journey, man. And like I keep saying, this journey is going to continue. I'm doing this work, but I'm going to work on myself the rest of my life. I'm still doing my reentry while I do this work. I've been home 4 years. I came home 4 years ago from a 10-year prison sentence. Over half of that was done in solitary confinement, IMU. So just, I never thought about my reentry. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know I had that option. But getting close to my release day, I knew something needed to change. And so I knew I just didn't need a release from prison. That wasn't going to work. I needed to release myself from two other things, and that was my addiction and my gang involvement. Because if I didn't do that, I was going to hit the streets full force again. And I knew that, being realistic with myself. So, I mean, I met Chris 17, 18 years ago, and we had our ups and downs. But when I made that decision, I knew who to reach out to. And I reached out to Chris, and Chris like, hey, we're doing this reentry thing. And I was like, cool, what is it? Like, send me the reentry form. And he sent it to me. And I've been through the dirt and back, gang involvement, politics, destroying my community, destroying my family, not being in my son's life, destroying myself. But out of all that, the reentry form was the scariest thing I had ever seen. LFOs, child support, employment, driver's license, housing. I didn't want nothing to do with any of that. Being in prison was easier. Destroying myself was easier. And so, can y'all still hear me? And so I just trusted the process, man. I came home and connected with Chris and started on my reentry. Immediately got enrolled into the college. I got employed, started working nights, and I got my driver's license. I was like, all right, cool. Like, I can do this. I can do this, right? And I kept asking, like, I'm gonna be all right, right? And so just getting those affirming questions, and then being surrounded by people that were already doing the work and doing good, and learning how to say no and cut off people when I need to. And so I started working on my reentry, man. And about 2 years ago, I was still working nights, full-time student, living out of my mom's garage. And Chris came up to me and he said, "Hey, I got this position. Do you want to do it?" And my first question to him was, "Well, do you think I can do it?" But inside, I was like, "Do I deserve this? Do I deserve to be here?" And Chris is like, "Hell yeah! Like, come on, come do this." So yeah, I started doing the reentry work, and everything started falling into place. But I know it wasn't just reentry; it was community. I started getting involved with places that I never thought I even would be accepted, or if I even belonged there. And I still struggle with that. What's that called? Imposter syndrome. Like, do I belong there? Do I belong here? Will I get accepted? Well, it's not a matter of whether I'm going to get accepted or not. It's what's working, and I'm going to pull the rest of them that are hurting, that are struggling, that are still in the darkness. I'm going to pull them into this community, and this is their place. This is where we belong. It's been a hard journey, but it's also been very healing, you know. And the fact that I didn't have to change who I was, I just needed to heal from all the bullshit. Excuse my language, but I mean, you just, like me, like, I'm glad that I can be myself. I'm glad that I don't have to change. I can be upfront about my stuff. I can be upfront about my pain. I can be upfront about what's working, what's not working. You know, I got love for the streets. I got love for people that are broken. I got love for the hurt that's going on, because I know that deep down inside, it's what's helping me heal and on my journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that personal experience. So my next question was going to be about reentry, but we've started that conversation a little now. Before we get to that, I wanted to go back, see if we could go back to Christina and Kamanti. And I wanted to specifically ask you about the justice frameworks you were talking about and how that informs the work that you're doing around like participatory defense, or the work that you're doing in your organization. If you could just expand a little more on that prior to going into the reentry conversation.
Participatory justice, right, is it's just a new word for old practice, right? And what this is community advocacy at its best. And so, what we do and what we've known and seen work, right, whether it's, pre-sentencing people in the county jail fighting fresh cases, or folks who have been locked inside the prison system for years, decades, and they find themselves coming back in front of a court to be resentenced, right? Participatory justice or community advocacy, this is what brings that community that supports this person to the courtroom, right? To the courtroom as a way of not only letting the prosecutor and the defense know, but also the judge, that there is a community here that supports this person, that's willing to provide them with the support they need to transition successfully back into community, right? And so for the work that we do, we use reintegration instead of reentry. And Chris really talked about that, is because reentry is just helping people acquire the things that they need. If you need a housing, here it is. If you need transportation, here's an ORCA card. Your employment, we found you a job. You should be well on to your success. But reintegration is walking a person through the additional things that ultimately come as a person result to changing their life, right? How do you build better relationships with your family, with your community? How do you not allow anxiety or panic attacks to really overwhelm you when you find yourself in community spaces where you don't feel like you belong, right? We're walking with folks through those things as a way of letting them know it's okay. If you want to leave, we can bounce, and there's no pressure, right? And so loving a person through the process, the entire process, especially with regards to the criminal justice system, is important. Because what we've been able to see is that when the courtroom is empty, when a young person is getting charged with charges, they lock them up, no questions asked. But when the community is there demanding that they be released back into the care of community, that we have a plan lined out for them, that this is where they're going to go to school, these are the people that are going to be interjecting in their life as a way of making sure that they stick to the plan, the judge will then feel more comfortable to agree with the process, right? It's the same on the back end, right? And that's ultimately how I got free, because in 1997, I went to prison for a life without the possibility of parole sentence for the harm I caused in my community. But in 2022, July 8th, the community came to my resentencing as a way of speaking to the court, as a way of saying, we want this person back because they have value to our community. They can assist the issues that are going on. And so that is essentially the practice, right? Is that we are getting community in the habit of advocating for their loved ones against the system. And this isn't just about criminal proceedings either, right? This is family court. This is in schools. This is in juvenile system. This is everywhere where we feel that institutions are ultimately crippling the development of human beings. And so that's the example of how it is actually applied, is that when we bring community into the decision-making process, and then the outcomes are always favorable to the folks who's standing on the side of community. So, hopefully that helped to, create a better example for folks.
Thank you. That was so incredibly powerful. And I really thank you for that distinction between, reentry compared to reintegration and what that really looks like. So thank you so much. Does anybody have any additional comments about question number 1, or do we want to get deeper into question number 2? Question number 2. All right. So question number 2, which we've already talked a little about, was just about the approaches to reentry or reintegration. I like reintegration better, as Kamanti has taught us. Like how you exactly how you go about doing that, and how you involve community, and how that justice framework informs the work that you do around this.
I can start. At Underground Ministries, we have 2 tiers of what we do. We have our local kind of legacy work among a relationship and reintegration with gang-affected individuals, primarily in Skagit County, and given that those lives and networks bleed over into our neighboring counties. But it's focused in Skagit County, and Alex directs that. But we also have another program that's been growing the last couple of years called One Parish, One Prisoner. It started by when we were traveling around and speaking to a number of churches, just because those are that's our community touch point and our networks. People would say, what can we do? And someone told us that in Washington State, there's roughly the same of incarcerated people. This was back in 2016, as there are men and women inside the Department of Corrections. And so just looking at that number made us think, what if every faith community out there had a relationship with one person, didn't start a program, but had a relationship with one person, and they could be equipped with the basics of reentry and reintegration skills, and could learn enough to kind of make them safe enough so they're not just operating out of paternalism and just kind of white savior mentalities. So we now are using that, seeing that what Kamanti is saying, that our best work when I was just working alone for years is when it wasn't just me, but when a number of community members, employers, friends, baby mamas, neighbors were showing up at court together. And when we were offering the judge a stack of 15 letters, the judge had to postpone the court time because they had to read through all the letters of the community saying, we want this person. And so our approach to do that is people can't write those letters if it's just they saw a petition online or they said yes on Facebook. It's really about creating pre-release relationships. So whether it's us training our one-person prisoner teams around the state, or what I still do, or what Alex already has, because he's part of this community, that's what's so great, is friendships, access, communication, trust, hope, all a year, 2 years before release. And so that's the first part, is relationships and pre-release relationships. That's where there's hope. And that's where we can build a plan collaboratively, instead of, hey, just show up, here's the address, here's our resource, show up when you get out. Oftentimes I had that, people would never show up. But when we had a plan, we build it together for a year or two. And then we're starting right there on the gate when they get out, and we're going out for tacos. And we're walking through even the panic attacks in the first day, the first week, picking them up for their first appointments, going to Department of Corrections together, just getting through the basic steps that not only helps accompany people through a very confusing system. There's no like clear Disney map they give you when you step out of prison, like you first go here, then go here. So navigating that, but then helping that relationship ground the whole process. That's how we start. And then we look at both the physical barriers that they need to, that are blocking them, driver's license. And you can't get that without removing holds on your driver's license in a lot of different courts, and going to multiple municipal courts, district courts, finding where they are, getting the case number, getting it removed, paying off some of those fines, getting to mandatory treatment or mental health evaluations from DOC. All those are the structural barriers, opening relationships with employers. And that's all, again, relationships. There's not just like a going to work source rarely works, no offense. But oftentimes it's relationships with 2, 3, 4 employers. They know me, they know how we work, and they can sit down in their front office and hear the story of someone we work with, and like, let's give it a shot. And that birthed Underground Coffee and our underground employment network. And so, Alex, I don't know if you want to share more about how you're expanding now on not just having more navigators, maybe introduce some navigators with us today, but also how we're growing into underground healing and the sense of peer support community.
Yeah, I want to touch on our underground employment model real quick. So we have a couple employers that we work with. We have this model. It's called underground employment, to where when men and women are coming home, we get them their driver's license first. Because if they're driving without a license, like, they're already in their head, they're already breaking one rule. What is it to break another one, you know? So get them their driver's license first, and then get them employment. But we got this relationship with these employers to where they know that they're working on their reentry. They got DOC meetings, they got doctor's appointments, they got things that come up, and they understand that. They're like, all right, they need to miss work for that. It's okay, because it's part of the program, it's part of reentry. To where if they were just getting a job somewhere, they wouldn't be that flexible with them. So yeah, just growing the team. By the way, growing the team, I got a couple people here I want to introduce. So they did their reentry through the program, and they were just hired a couple weeks ago. So I want to introduce Karina and Kiki. They're both formerly incarcerated, formerly gang affected, and they're from the community. And so when I was told, hey, you can hire 2 more, who better than the people we serve, right? Like, that's who we need at the table.
Thanks to the ACH support.
Yeah, thanks to ACH. We got them out in the community now.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to touch like the importance of like Monty was saying, the importance of accompanying somebody to court. I can't really say much, but I will say that we had a youngster who 15 months ago hit the juvenile system, and then turned 18 and got sent over to the county jail, and was fighting a big case, facing years. And he just got his case dismissed last week. And the judge was so much on his side. We were there to support him along the whole way. The judge was so much on his side, and was pretty much just shutting the prosecutors down, because he's seen this kid. he's seen his thing was like, why am I gonna throw this kid's life away? There's you don't got nothing on him, like, and so like that was just amazing. I guess that's the first time it's happened here in this county for many years, and like that judge is amazing, and his a public defender. He said this public defender, he's like, you really hit the jackpot when you got this public defender, because he worked tooth and nail to get you off, and here you are. So now doing that holistic reentry with the little homie that just came home, and it's amazing. It's amazing what community and involvement and just being present can do. I know that when I pick somebody up from prison, and I take them out that first day, I need them just as much as they need me, because I mean, deep down inside, I'm still freaking out. I walk into Costco by myself and I'm out within 5 minutes. I leave the cart and everything. Nope, too much people. But when I do it with somebody else, it's that much better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that, meeting the new folks on your team brings up the next question I wanted to ask y'all, which is just how can we, as the network, this coalition, how can we support the work that you all are doing in your organizations?
Well, I'll take it. So I think there's a few different ways. Of course, resources are always needed and necessary in this work. But I think beyond monetary is more people showing up in courtrooms, watching, being there for folks. We were at a court hearing a couple weeks ago for some youth involved in a shooting, and the judge actually said, or called out, just noticing community in the courtroom, because usually when youth are in front of him, he doesn't see that, right? They're alone, their parents aren't there, their families aren't there. And so I think being able to show up, and you could reach out and ask how to get involved in that, whether it's at the Denny court in Snohomish County, which is where we're out of, or even in your own community, wherever you're at, go to the courthouse, watch the court hearings and see what's happening. And then, just being able to use your access to break open gates for people doing this work, so that we can be able to tap into more resources and skill up more folks and help more people.
Yeah, there cannot be a stress enough about resources. You know what I mean? Resources. Because the thing about Chris Hulk and Alex and they're only one person. They only can be one place at a time, right? And so now when we get to thinking about how this problem continues to grow, we also need messengers. And so sometimes we have to be able to fund staff. Sometimes we need folks just to be able to, like she said, not just get involved, but we need you to really get well-rounded in the things that are going on in your community. This is your community we're talking about, right? So the question is do you want to improve your community or not? Your community, the community that you live in, that you raise your kids in, that you shop in, that there's a lot of folks in your community that is under-resourced, right? And so for those folks who don't have, the hands on the purse strings of whatever organization that they work for, but you can always donate a few dollars to the organizations that's doing the work. But I think that more importantly than anything, man, is that you need live breathing bodies, to be able to digest the stories, to be able to get close to the actual things that is happening in their community, because there's still people who hear stories and hear about things that are going on and still don't believe that these things are happening in their community. There's no way that the police are doing this. There's no way that we just heard from our senator, or we just heard from, and I'm telling you, the way that you really learn the real stories and really get people invested is when they begin to see the things firsthand. When you sit in a courtroom and you see that there's a 14-year-old kid right here who did something that caused harm, but that wasn't his intention, but now the court is willing to throw him away, and you realize that ain't nobody over here pointing out the fact that he's only 14 years old, that this is a child here that had their whole future ahead of them. You know what I mean? When you get community members involved in a space where you see a child's life like that being thrown away or disregarded, you start to think about your kids, your nephews, your nieces, and then you start to realize, you know what, we need to do something about this. You know what I mean? And so, yes, when people can't give resources, give your time, get involved. You know what I mean? Learn more about what's going on in order for you to be able to make more sound judgments, decisions, but also to be able to make sure that the people that you're working with is being able to contribute in an informed way, right?
And also, I wanted to add one more thing that I hear Kamani say a lot, but this could very easily be any one of our own children that end up in the system. We just never know. And so I think that if you can think about how would you treat your own family member or loved one or child if they were going through something, that's the way we should be treating all of our children or all of our community members. Is the same way we would treat our own loved one.
Yeah, I would just build on that with a few thoughts. Just first off, expanding what Christina just said, that whether a lot of the folks on this call and in the network are already embedded and doing great work in the community. And so you all are a really unique subset, and we're privileged to be able to be speaking with you all. And a lot of you already know a lot of this, but two of my thoughts there are, I see this when I work with churches, but I think this way of thinking is across the social services sector. Is they're like, well, that's great. We don't do incarceration stuff. We're working with sex trafficking interruption, or we're working with this homelessness thing. And sadly, the way the entire American nexus of systems work is that all roads lead to incarceration. And so in homelessness, if you're working with people who are homeless, they've probably been in and out of the jail. And that's probably what has added greater barriers and crushed their existence into being on the street where we met them. You want to deal with domestic violence and sexual assault services. How do we address the folks where violence is being perpetuated inside those systems? The women who are incarcerated, almost all of them, but not just the women, the men, most men, and I get to know this as a pastor after years of writing letters, almost every guy I know was assaulted as a kid, and even sexually assaulted as well, but it takes a long time to build the trust to talk about that. And so all these issues that we can get kind of siloed around, all of them sadly funnel through the tragedy of the human landfill, the human trash can system, where the people who are most wounded get thrown away. And so think about how your community works. Think about how your agency already has an overlap and it's just not being highlighted. Think about which clients you have that could be part of their story. Maybe they're not proud of it, but just have your kind of your senses up and your ears up for, well, I was away for a while, or when I was locked up, go back to that, and be aware that that has attached to it a whole set of trauma and legal barriers, maybe more than other folks in your caseload. And the second part would be, that was the two things, is be aware that all of them kind of like funnel together, and be aware of how your clients already might need, along with what Kamani was saying with the reintegration is, and what Alex does all the time, is walking with folks, like just saying, hey, I've connected them with a resource. I've worked with so many people who are so excited to email me, I connected with a resource, but that's not exciting for folks that we work with. They want to know if someone will like pick them up or meet them outside, or like, hey, I'll call and I'll put you together. So exactly as Kamani was saying, what would you do for your own son? You wouldn't just give them a Post-it note. You'd say, hey, let's go together. What are you doing tomorrow afternoon? And that you walk with people. And that's part of the community healing. It's not just wraparound services. That's part of the community healing. Alex, how would you say people can get involved? Especially you're a master networker in Skagit here, Alex. Like, how have you opened new doors and friendships from YMCA to employers to even the DOC? How do you do that? You're on mute, bud.
I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago, and they said, hey, you're really good at what you do. And I corrected them. I was like, I don't use that language. I'm not good at what I do. I love what I do. What I do is working for those who are broken, and it's working for me. I'm not good at it. I love it. I fell in love with this work because it saved my life. Um, and the way you can help is just like, if you see somebody who's struggling, who's broken, embrace them. Even it might be scary. Their past might be scary. Their brokenness might be scary, but embrace them. Introduce them into community. So what I do is like, in the morning, I created the relationship with the YMCA Family Center. So when somebody's coming home, I'm taking them to the gym with me. Let's go to the gym. Let's go into the sauna. What, you've never been into a sauna? It's scary. It's scary for me too. Let's go sit in there. You know, let's go swimming. They're like, well, oh, I've never even owned a pair of swim trunks. Okay, let's get you some swim trunks, you know? And I get them swim trunks with little rubber duckies and stuff on them, you know? So I just introducing them into the unknown, so they know it's safe, you know? And getting them enrolled into the college. There's so many programs there. There's so many clubs. We got the Breaking Free Club for the formerly incarcerated right here. And so yeah, there's just so many ways. Everybody touched up on everything so beautiful. So I mean, just it's teamwork, and just seeing somebody for who they are, meeting them where they're at, giving them a chance. I mean, I don't believe in second chances. I believe in 1,000 chances, you know?
People want to get involved personally with the work that we're doing, just hit us up. You know what I mean? Come plug in with us, come, you know what I mean, come tap in, you know what I mean, and get involved. But we can always use more people who are willing to lend a helping hand. Many hands make light work.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say too, even if you're thinking like, I don't have money, or I don't have time to show up in courtrooms, like if you have other skills like marketing or graphics, or just any skill you have, I'm sure that any of us could utilize in this work.
Yeah, and another thing that we invite some of the communities we work with is to start bringing the conversation out of the shadows and out of the shame. And even like on social media, just taking an inventory, like, hey, does anyone have a loved one who's locked up? Like when we oftentimes, not just like social work groups or conferences, but when we speak in churches, there's always two people hanging around the lobby at the end, and they wait till everyone clears out, and they come in really quiet, and I say, so my son was incarcerated for a while, or my husband is still down, and they're so excited to talk with us and receive some support. But that we kind of gently try to point that this is a problem. Does your community know about this? No, I don't like to talk about it. So the more that we can normalize the conversation and maybe ask people, like, do we have someone who's, when asking the question, people then feel free, like, oh yeah, I do, that people feel seen, and we can start to create that community of care and awareness. Like, would it be nice if I sent a card to your loved one, or can we help send a Christmas package? It's not just about the Christmas package. It's really about saying you're saying to that person who's in prison or they've been out, we see you and we care, and you belong to this community, which is really the root of this. Even if their body's out of prison, there's still a lingering spirit of belonging, not belonging. And it's in us too. It's not just a mistake we need to correct in the heads of our brothers and sisters out of prison. We oftentimes, I think, still don't think they belong. There's just still a client we hope doesn't go back to prison. But how do we see that they really belong, and we want to invite them to the barbecue?
Food solves everything. Let's just throw a bunch of big barbecues.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your powerful responses and your teaching. Before we go into breakout sessions, I think there was a question from the chat. So just thinking about all the employers that have no felonies policies or housing, that is discriminating against folks with, previous convictions. Have any of you been able to change any of these policies, like in terms of employers or housing agencies or landlords or anything like that?
Well, I know in King County, well, King County is probably the only county that I know right now that has actually made policy changes as a way of not or eliminating the felony question, the box with regards to home rental, renting a house. And so in King County, folks who have criminal backgrounds, they don't face many challenges other than just the cost of living in King County is expensive. But other than that, I don't see any other policy changes that's actually kind of been leveled flat as a way of increasing those opportunities. I know that there's some people who have just grown more aware of some of the challenges that people are facing, and I think that especially in counties like King County, they're giving jobs to people who are ready to do the work. And so those are also good places to find employment. But those are the only policies I can think specifically housing that's been changed.
Thank you.
As far as like over here, like one of the big ones is for housing. Like if somebody's gonna go finally try to get into a house to rent, there's a lot of renters who are big on they got a record or they got felonies, and they could put in the application, but 9 times out of 10 they won't receive it. I know when I moved into my place 2.5, 3 years ago, I got a letter, a recommendation from Chris. He typed out a nice letter, and I took it to the place where I was applying for, and they accepted me right away. So like, I think all they wanted to see was like, oh, they got people to back them up. They are part of something. They're not just these monsters. So what we do a lot is letters of recommendation, and we just keep it real. Like, hey, this person's working on themselves. They're doing a lot of healing. They're on a journey. They're surrounded by community, and I think a lot of landlords just want to hear that. Like, all right, well, they got a lot going on. They're in the community.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and say I think like helping skill people with like how to talk to their landlords or employers about their background too is helpful. But I think like if we're out networking and stuff and we run into an employer, just like building that relationship and talking about our communities, so I'm not just looking at a list of people that accept felonies. I'm like go out to community and build relationships with the employers that you want people to go work at. Or oftentimes getting them involved in this work too, right? So connecting them with the orgs that have the resources to bring folks on, skill them up, so that they can because oftentimes a lot of people want to give back in this way. So, and there's also, there's a partner agency I used to work with, What's Next Washington. And so they do a lot of work around building relationships with employers to hire people that have backgrounds.
Thank you. I'm going to go to, I think, one more question. I see a question in the chat that says, in my time in social services, it seemed that more often new assistance programs were all about light touch, which is so different than walking alongside. How do we shift this? Or are you seeing a change in this regard?
Can someone say more about what the kind of what that's code for? What is light touch? Does that mean like do less?
I think Lisa, go ahead. Do you want to explain a little more about what light touch means for all of us?
Yeah, I used to work for a community action agency and a resource center. And, often when new programs, adding staff to assist people, often people coming out of incarceration, people newly homeless, what have you, the programs were often geared towards what they called light touch. So, exactly what you all talked about, like giving someone a phone number, a Post-it note with a list of resources, but it was more like seeing more people versus like getting deep with individuals. So we'd say, come back if this doesn't work or if you need anything else. But really it was, we didn't know if those resources were available, if they were full, what have you. So light touch is just like having a conversation, making a connection, saying this is the resource. But we didn't have the time to necessarily say, let's call together, let's go together. And every time I heard about a new program, it was still this light touch type program. And it was really frustrating because when you're in that role, you just know that what is needed is that walk alongside. So I've been kind of out of that realm, and I was curious hearing from you all that your model is walking alongside if our kind of state programs that trickle into our communities are also changing by recognizing this need. If that helps.
I have a thought on that, but I've taken a lot of airtime. Christina, Alex, or Kamani, you want to go after that first?
Now go ahead, knock it down.
I think what comes to mind is something new I'm learning, Lisa, in our work as a small organization, that I think a lot of that isn't just, but what you're pointing out is not just like service providers that don't want to walk alongside, but that pressure internally for basically quantity or quantity over depth. And I've felt that nexus as in a small organization kind of switching in the last 2 years to I'm writing more grants. And as I'm writing grants, I found that it's not even the granting organization that's telling me I need to do a lot of numbers, but I found that oftentimes they're saying, you tell us what your outcomes and indicators are, and then how you're going to measure that. So I start flexing all these numbers. Alex, how many folks are working with right now? Yeah, we could double that if you gave us this amount of money. And I find that as in the grant writing hustle, that's the moment where I lapsed into numbers over depth. And so Alex and our navigators were just like doing driver's licenses like mad with folks, but not practicing the relationship and the accompaniment that we know we need to do. And I found the bottleneck was in me as the director saying like, oh, then I need to go back to grants and say, that's not our value. And it felt risky to write our next grant application to say, we're only going to serve this amount of people this season, but our value is relationship. Our value is continuity over time. Our value is wraparound services that walk people through so I wrote new indicators and new metrics, and I found that was it. I couldn't even blame it on the grant. It was me writing my grants. And then now what I'm accountable for is exactly our vision. Have you felt that, Christina and Kamani, in the grant hustle?
Yeah.
Like, do I say how many people we serve, or do I talk about how much we do for a smaller group?
Right. And, I think that, some people get caught into the hustle and bustle of chasing the dollar. Right. But what happens is that it ultimately, dilutes, the relationship building process. Right. And so as an organization, as community organizations, first and foremost, right, not institutions, as community organizations, we got to make sure that we make sure that we lead with our values. You know what I mean? And we stay, really grounded on the things that work for us. And so if we have to do more with less money, like we've been doing, we'll continue to keep doing that. But, with regards to the question, she was like with the light touch. I think that, for anyone who works in the social service sector where you're working with other people, one of the most universal truths that is important for people is that you have to establish trust with your client. You have to. If you went into if many of the people that you see every day are vulnerable people who are already struggling just to be able to reveal that there are issues in their life, and you essentially give them a Post-it note or a card of somebody else or directions to go find resources someplace else and you not assist them, it's almost disrespectful, right? And for you to think that that person is going to come back to you and still, again, vulnerable, broken, looking for support, it's not going to happen, right? And so I think that with regards to the success of the services that you're providing, it is going to require you to take more time to connect with the people you're serving. And sometimes the people that you want to send them to, maybe the step is, when you don't have time, instead of sending them to the resource, invite the resource to your organization. These are people who are getting paid. And so if they want to advocate what their service is, you invite them to your program. We want you to show up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, because we have a group of people here who need the support and services that you provide. Sometimes it's being able to, you don't have to walk with them literally, but you at least have to be present of at least seeing that the things that you suggested is actually going to pay out or pay off, or that's even a person on the other side of the line. But trust is the most important piece, because once a person feels disrespected, your organization, everything that you're talking about, a person will brush it off like they're not real. That's not what they really do, because this is my experience. And so for us to continue to, again, if we're in the social service work area where you are dealing with people, we have to be a little bit more intentional about making sure that we make a meaningful connection. It's important for the future of that person. So I just wanted to add a couple of little nuggets with regards to the light touch comment, because, you know, I think more is required of us.
Yeah, and I would just say, I'm not sure I've heard that language before, but I have used approaches where I am literally, going everywhere with a person, or walking them through it, to, you know, just empowering them with the skills, giving them the agency to, you know, use those skills and apply them. So I think it just depends on like the unique needs of the person. Some people I think are highly motivated and determined and capable, and I think other people need more one-on-one time for the support. And so I think just realizing that there is no one way to approach it, and that it is going to take individualized, you know, plans or care for people. I think that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Oh, Alex, were you going to say something? I saw
Yeah,
you.
I just want to touch on what Kamonte said. Like, it's all in your values, like who you are as a person. I mean, I graduated the human service program at the Skagit Valley College. So like, to me, it's like servicing humans. How do we service humans? And even if somebody comes to us that wouldn't be somebody who qualifies for the program, I still don't give them a sticky note. I'll be like, hey, I can connect you with other resources, and let's go get some lunch, and I'll take you over there. And then on the way over there, I'll be like, what's going on? You know, what else? What's going on inside of you? You know, get to know them. Even though I'm not going to be working with them, I want to get to know them that day, and let them know that, hey, we're here. I see you, and you're not alone. And also with inviting organizations to the program, I got a weekly group that I host on Wednesdays for the men and women that we serve, called Underground Healing, and I invite partners from the community. And then it's funny because most of the time they're like, where are we going to set up our table? Like, no, you're sitting in the circle with us, and you're going to get asked the same questions that we asked them, and you're going to open up like they open up because we're all one. You're not going to set up a table on the side. You're going to sit in the circle with us.
I would just add to that when Kamani said a minute ago, you know, we need to do more. There's a mystery there where the doing more, getting involved in people's lives, I think refreshes us. It refreshes me. When I get into just doing like the shallow work for a lot of people, I go home really stressed. I get really burnt out. It's just a level of giving, and it doesn't feel satisfying. But when I do more and I walk with people, I find that I'm part of a story, and I find that I really love this person, and they're enjoying me and reflect me back to ways that help me laugh at myself, and they see me in ways. So I think that doing more, I think I just want to asterisk that I don't think it'll burn us out. I think going the next step is where we experience that mutuality and community that makes our work sustainable in the first place.
Thank you so much. I definitely agree that there's so much healing in resistance and community. And so I like that, instead of thinking about how it will burn us out, how it will sustain us and encourage us to go on. So I thank you so much for all of this discussion. There's questions coming through the chat, but I want to get a chance to get into our breakout sessions so that folks can discuss amongst themselves kind of what you've taught us today, and how it can apply in everybody's organizations and in their work. So the question I would like to folks to think about in the breakout sessions is, in the spirit of radical reimagining, how can we as individuals, organizations, and the Collaborative Action Network collectively enhance community engagement, fostering partnerships among diverse collaborators to support reintegration and these alternative justice initiatives? This is your chance to really radically reimagine. I want you to think about what our region would look like if everybody's needs were met, if everyone was safe and there was no jails or prisons. Like, really, really dream here. And so we will discuss and then come back to the larger group to share, and then have time for more questions. So I think we'll be put in the groups now. Thank you everyone for participating and for joining us back in the large group. I would like to hear if anybody, I want to hear what you talked about in your group. Is there anybody that would like to kind of report back what was discussed? And then we'll have time for that, and then we'll go to more questions for the panelists. So anyone who would like to share what was discussed.
Real quickly, just my name's Stephen Simmons, he, him. I'm a formerly incarcerated professional and social work student. One of the things that we talked about was just sort of getting into the vision aspect of things, and just talking about needing to change our systems of incarceration from systems of punishment to like systems of nurturing and healing. That if we do end up in situations where folks are needing to like take some time away from society to work on themselves, that we don't, do that in this punishment scheme, that where no one, just where you're continually like reharmed.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Any challenges that came up in the conversations?
In our group, I had mentioned wanting to have experts who are working with reintegration directly to come out to the resource center that I manage and see how we're approaching our work, and let us know, because our goal is everybody who comes into the space feels like they belong and they walk out feeling cared for. So if that's not a mark we're hitting with folks who are traveling such a tough road already, we want to know and we want to improve. So that's one of the things I'm hoping. And there was a lot of talk in our group about regular collaboration with others who are trying to reimagine this whole system and completely reimagine the way that we're doing our work, so that we're not duplicating, but we are adopting some similar policies and procedures and activities that are really moving things forward.
Great, thank you. So really talking about how this can inform like practice changes in your organization. Did anybody else discuss that?
One of the barriers that came up in our discussion was that delay with Medicaid coverage picking up again. And that's led to a good conversation about some upcoming changes and some possibilities that that we could look at around having, so the change with Medicaid having a 90-day window pre-release to get that ball rolling, and what a difference it would make to give that same window to all the social services that would need to come into play so that folks could really get that network of support up and running. So when folks are released, it's ready for them.
Great, awesome. Anybody else like to share? If not, I'd like to hand it over to Christina for a few words, and then we'll do more questions from the group.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add that that question about what else could we like radically imagine. Our organization is doing some work around some public forums where we're going to show a film screening called Since I've Been Down, which will kind of highlight some things related to restorative justice. And so we're going to have a community conversation around what it looks like to build different networks of care in Snohomish County. And then similarly, we have like a smaller cohort of folks that will be system impacted that will go through something similar, but in a more intimate version. And yeah, so if you know system impacted folks in Snohomish County that would be interested in participating in something like that, please reach out. But if you're interested in showing up to one of the forums, we're going to hold 5 of them over the next year. The first one will be in October 14th in Linwood. And so, yeah, please let us know. We can send you the details.
Thank you. All right, so I've seen a few questions coming through the chat, but would anybody like to ask their question out loud? If not, I can go through the chat questions.
I will ask mine. For those who are in need of mental health services, how can we provide mental health services without them feeling like they're going back into solitary confinement?
Well, for the mental health practitioners, I don't know what type of processes that are already in place. But I know for, the Black Prisoners Caucus community group and many other organizations that also employ formerly incarcerated folks, the way in which we kind of talk about therapy and healing and mental health support, right, is just that, by talking about it. And one of the things that we also make sure that we, really emphasize is that mental health support does not require medication. Right, just by being able to help folks, right, really dispel some of the myths and the stereotypes around mental health services. As we have these conversations and as people are able to share their experience, there's many folks that I know that have gotten out of prison that sees a therapist regularly because they feel that it's important for their transition. And so the best ways for, folks to be introduced, I think into a mental health pathway is I think it also has to be something that is offered and suggested by folks who are actually walking through that process in order for people to inquire about what's the process, what does it require, what do I have to and what can I refuse to do? Because if it's a person trying to, obtain this type of support on their own without any support, without any guidance, I think it can be intimidating. But the way that I've been able to see it work is for many of the folks who are already in community, just really helping people to build a knowledge base around what mental health support is, what it consists of, right? And it also contains a lot of, modern and traditional practices with regards to mental health support. And so I think that right there is just it, just having open conversations and dialogue around what mental health support is, how you can access it, what it is and what it isn't. That's the biggest thing. You have to dispel the things in which scares people away. Because if they're able to experience that in community with other community members, then it won't feel prisonish, right? It's not required. It's not making you do anything, and and you don't have to do it as a way of getting access to something else. Like most of the time, systems do, right? They force you to do treatment and all of these things as a way of getting access or favors or extended benefits, etc. This has to be something that is healthy, it's wholesome, it's non-forced, and it's something that they can feel that it's going to be working for them because they see it working in other people's lives. And so that's the way in which I've seen it modeled. And that's kind of what I would suggest.
Yeah, Cynthia, one of the things that I've learned kind of being between two worlds, on one hand, my wife is a mental health practitioner. On the other hand, I work with a lot of guys who have spent a lot of years in solitary confinement, and that they're just different worlds and different approaches to mental health. And so on one hand, I can feel very pro mental health services world, all of that. But it's helped me to understand what happens in prison, and especially what happens in the hole, that's called mental health, is not what most of us on the outside think of as mental health. We're like, hey, get some mental health services. Isn't that great? We have to know what happens on the inside is medication is over-medicated. Medication is terribly prescribed, and it just is a sedative to keep the animals in the cage calm. That dehumanizing language, I'm putting asterisk quotes around, like that's how it's administered. And so oftentimes when they see someone who gets on meds, they're just out. They're just feeling drowsy and drooling. And they're like, I'll never go on that shit again, Chris. And like, actually, there's a better way of doing it. But I realize the mental health world in prison has already broken their trust for decades. As well as the system of mental health in the West is contrary to what the healthy, expansive definition that Kamanti was nudging towards, is really just about diagnosis and medication. And so we're dealing with the most over-labeled population in America. And so to go to a place where they're given another diagnosis, which may feel medical and healing, but if it's diagnosis centered as mental health, like that won't work. But if it's really about an expansive sense of thriving and health and multiple indicators, and it'd be good to go talk to someone, but we need to be sensitive to their experience and not just overly defensive of or pushing mental health if it's just about diagnosis and sedation.
And I'd love to jump in briefly. And as like someone that has both, I'm sure all of you might feel the same, but there are great and bad things about the mental health care system. But like some of the barriers that I run into with people is like a lot of the free access to mental health care is people that are going through their internships. And so they're often people that can't walk a long process with somebody. And I think that's really important when we're talking about mental health and people being very vulnerable and deep, that they want somebody that can stick with them for a long time. And then all the other stereotypes and fears that have already been named. But I think we need like quality access to mental health care providers, right? And so some of the way I see that being done in community is, or different types of healing, but with access to mental health care providers, is through one, like healing circles, right? And so what's different about that is you're in a community of folks that have similar experiences to you, and you're all going through healing processes together, right? And things can be reciprocal, right? So if I'm talking to my mental health therapist, I can't necessarily, they're not going to be telling me about their experiences too. And I think that's different in a healing circle. And then those folks also have access to what we call healing justice coaches. And so they do have like the mental health background, but can have more of a relationship with the person than you could if you had the boundaries of what a mental health care provider could offer. So I just wanted to say that that's a tool that I've used in community when folks don't want to go to the traditional mental health care system. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I think that, definitely also like coming from healthcare, just always thinking about how the healthcare system and mental health and psychiatry really like replicates these carceral structures, and how, you know, folks are institutionalized and all of this. So thank you for bringing this up and also discussing alternatives. If there are any more questions from the audience, if you could use the hand raise function in Zoom, if you'd like to ask your question out loud. I also saw questions in the chat around, let's see, do you have any recommendations of organizations that we should connect with who are doing similar work on Island, Whatcom, and San Juan counties?
Yeah, and I think there were a couple of responses in the
Oh.
chat. So I know that we'll get the chat as part of the recording. I have my hand raised and I realize that my hand is like in my stairwell, so you may not see it.
Go ahead.
I both a comment, I don't know, a comment and an aspiration. Because, you know, Colette, you started with the slides about how incarceration varies by race. And I want to make sure that we all learn how to not shy away from how race is a factor in all of the things we've been talking about for the last 2 hours. And, you know, just how the courts traditionally view the value of lives differently depending on the color or language or anything of the person sitting in front of them. And so just like how, because I'm just envisioning like a next conversation, you know, but like how we can just get better and stronger about recognizing the influence that race has as we're talking about reintegration, as we're talking about those partnerships that, you know, the panelists were mentioning with courts and attorneys and such. I mean, part of this is us just learning how to value every life. I mean, you know, we internally talk about leading with love, but it's also like every life has a value. And just I appreciated that that's where you started. And I'd love to figure out how we come back to that. Because it's just really important as we think about my radically reimagined space in the universe. But just thank you for starting there.
Thank you. Do any of our panelists have any thoughts about that?
I have a question for
Go
the
ahead.
panel.
Mhm.
What will be a good society practice that I could personally implement in my community to educate people about, you know, not being judgmental toward people that have been in jail or like that is coming back to life? It's like I have find myself in this situation that I have seen a lot of judgment. So I would like to find a way to educate other people, to let them know that your past, it doesn't make you who you are. So if is any like practices or social ways to educate and encourage others to know more about how to support people that is in these situations in our communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess, and I think one of the great ways of really being able to start a conversation like this is the pathway that most people end up on that lands them in prison. It starts in school. And so I think that the way that we educate community members is by creating better ways in which we deal with kids who find themselves making poor decisions, right, at delicate times. And this starts with school. We can start the conversation there, right? Because I think that if your community begins to start saying is forming a question is how can we love each other through our decisions better, How do we love each other better, right? And the first way you do it is start by creating rules to where it prevents kids from getting kicked out of school, right? It starts to provide more support for kids where you can identify trouble happening in the lives of young people. You know, because when these young folks are now, because again, we're talking about how people are socialized to perpetuate punishment and harm. And it starts in school. When a child is not following the directions of the teachers, the things that starts to happen is we start to kick out, expel, and do all of the things that let the young people know that they're not wanted or welcomed. So what happens is their behavior perpetuates that energy. And so I think in community, we can start coming together as a way of loving our kids more, especially with regards to the ones who end up in the juvenile justice system. And that's a good place to start with regards to healing and restorative practices, because sometimes it's harder for communities to feel sympathetic to adults who are still making poor decisions. You know what I mean? It's harder to convince community members to love and care for folks who are grown, who we feel have all the functions and faculties to be able to maintain a grown life. However, for young people, all of those adults, it started when they were kids. And so I think that when we talk about building a healthier community, let's start by building more support around our young people first. Let's start trying to create more ways in which we create more excuses on why we don't throw kids out of school and why we don't lock people up for making decisions like property crimes and destruction of property and vandalism and all of these things that introduce kids to the system in the first place. I think if we start to create a community where when things like that happen, they're calling the parents and the community as a way of resolving those problems, those issues, that right there is a restorative justice practice, right? That's how a community is supposed to function. And I think that if you can get your community to start loving kids through their mistakes a little bit better, to where we start seeing juveniles close down, then I think that it will naturally have a ripple effect that will impact the larger criminal justice conversation. But I would say start there, build support around your young people, because it's going to be easier to be able to bring people on board to that conversation. But I think it has just as much of a larger impact overall. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Stephen for our last question because he's had his hand up.
Yeah, it's just kind of a comment, and I was hoping that I could get some reflections from folks on the panel. I just want to say that, you know, a lot of times when I'm in a space like this, like I want to lead with my best foot, and I want to like talk about the work that I've done, the degrees that I've gotten, my resiliency. You know, I know that people who are my supervisors or people that I work with tend to like look at folks like us and just see like the places we've come from, the things we've overcome, our resiliency, how strong we are, the barrier breakers that we are. But I think a piece that's missed is like the vulnerability that comes from, you know, a lifetime of trauma, addiction, you know what I mean? And, you know, just personally, like I found myself in a situation where I had been out for 8 years as a graduate student, and you know, just a pandemic, a toxic relationship, and some friends OD'd. Next thing I know, I'm using again. And you know, so, and I'd kind of like lost that piece of like taking care of myself. And I'm just curious what that brings up for y'all.
Yeah, Stephen, can you hear me? Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think being able to be vulnerable and spreading that vulnerability is the best. I mean, for myself, it's the best weapon I have. You know, if I'm able to be myself, and it's okay to be myself. It's okay to be vulnerable and let everybody know that, hey, like I don't got it all figured out. I'm struggling today. My anxiety's kicking my ass, bro. But I'm out here doing it, and I know I'm not doing it alone. I mean, that's I always lead with that, and it's helped me out, you know, and it continues to help me out. And then it encourages others to sit there and be like, oh wait, what, I can be myself, I can be vulnerable. I can let people know the real me, and then it creates that chain reaction to where people would start being vulnerable, and then they reconnect with their hearts, and then we can work better as a village, as a community.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, and all of the, not just for participating today, but for all the work that you have been doing. Thank you to everyone who participated in this discussion. I hope that this can be a very fruitful discussion and that it will just continue and develop into action. So there will be a link to the recording, the slides from today, and resources from the resource library that will all be posted in the resource library in the near future. And I think in the chat, there is a survey about today to just give us your constructive criticism. Learning session. Just so excited to work with everybody, and I can't express like the depth of my gratitude. So thank you.